Naomi's heels struck the tile, echoing in the corridor as she approached the glass-walled interview room. Sunlight bounced off the polished floor, highlighting her calm stride. She paused, smoothing the sleeve over her mother's gold bracelet, a quiet reminder of every barrier already crossed. Inside, Rich sat behind a sleek desk, posture relaxed, gaze appraising. His Rolex glinted as he reached for her résumé, but his eyes barely skimmed the words before flicking up to her hair, her skin. The details he found more important than her Stanford MBA or her patents in AI. The air was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and something colder: expectation. The receptionist outside stilled her typing, glancing up, sensing the tension radiating from the room. Rich leaned back, lips curling in a tight smile. "Stanford, huh? That's impressive." His tone was practiced, polite, but his attention wandered. Naomi kept her expression neutral, hands folded in her lap, the gold chain cool against her wrist. "Thank you," she replied, voice steady. "My research focuses on eliminating algorithmic bias." Rich's eyebrow arched, and he tapped her résumé against the desk, leaving small dents in the paper. "We value cohesion here," he said, drawing out the word. "How do you handle cultural differences?" His fingers made air quotes, the gesture as dismissive as his tone. Naomi's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. "Cohesion is built by listening and respecting difference," she said quietly. The receptionist outside shifted in her chair, the wheels squeaking. Rich's gaze drifted to the window, then back to Naomi. He shrugged, tossing her résumé toward the edge of the desk. It landed awkwardly, half on, half off, a metaphor for her place in his world. He stood, signaling the end. "We'll keep your file on hand," he said, already turning away. Naomi rose, her bracelet catching the light as she gathered her things. She met his eyes, holding his gaze for a beat longer than necessary. "I'm sure you will," she replied, her voice soft but unyielding. As she left, the glass walls reflected her dignity back at her, while Rich's laughter echoed faintly down the corridor. Naomi walked to the lobby, swiped her black card at the kiosk, and watched as "Shareholder access granted" flashed across the screen. The receptionist looked up, startled, as Naomi's quiet power shifted the air. The interview was over, but the real story had just begun. Before the story continues, please let us know from where you are watching this video. Write your city or country in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit like if you believe in stories that challenge injustice. Your engagement gives power to voices that need to be heard. The interview room felt colder as Rich picked up Naomi's résumé, his thumb smudging the corner. He didn't bother to read her list of achievements, her patents, her leadership roles, her years of hard work. Instead, he scanned the page with a distracted glance, then flicked it onto the table, letting it land askew. Naomi watched the movement, her heart pounding, but her face remained composed. The receptionist outside coughed quietly, stealing a glance through the glass. Rich leaned forward, elbows digging into the desk, and asked, "What makes you think you'd fit in here?" His voice was casual, but the question stung. Naomi drew a breath, choosing her words carefully. "I believe my experience speaks for itself. I've led teams through complex transitions and delivered results." Her tone was measured, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Rich's lips pressed into a thin line. He tapped his pen against the table, each click a reminder of his impatience. "We have a certain way of doing things," he said, not looking at her. "It's important to maintain harmony." Naomi caught the implication, her jaw tightening, but she refused to look away. "Harmony doesn't mean sameness," she replied. "It means respect for difference." The receptionist's chair creaked as she shifted, her eyes darting between Naomi and Rich. Rich shrugged, glancing at the résumé as if it were a menu he'd already decided against. "We've had issues in the past with adjustments," he said, trailing off, letting the sentence hang. Naomi nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. She let the silence stretch, unwilling to fill it with apologies or explanations. The tension in the room thickened, every second dragging. Finally, Rich stood, signaling the end. "We'll let you know," he said, voice flat. Naomi stood as well, gathering her things, her dignity intact. She left the room without looking back, her résumé left behind, but her resolve stronger than ever. Rich lingered by the window, arms crossed, eyes tracing the city skyline instead of meeting Naomi's. The air in the room was heavy, every breath thick with unspoken judgment. He turned, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You know, we're very selective. We're looking for someone who fits." The word hung between them, weighted and sharp. Naomi's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice even. "I understand. I've worked in many environments and built trust across teams." She watched as Rich's fingers curled around the edge of the desk, knuckles whitening. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "We want someone who understands our culture." His emphasis was unmistakable. Naomi's jaw set, but she didn't flinch. "Culture is shaped by the people you welcome," she replied, her words clear and steady. The receptionist outside shifted in her seat, glancing up from her screen, sensing the tension inside. Rich's gaze flickered, uncertainty flashing for a moment before he masked it with another practiced grin. "We've had some challenges with people who didn't quite gel." Naomi met his stare, refusing to shrink. "Difference isn't a challenge, it's an asset." Her words were quiet, but they landed with force. The room seemed to shrink, the silence stretching between them. He cleared his throat, looking away. "We'll be in touch," he said, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. Naomi stood, gathering her things with deliberate calm. She paused, at the door, glancing back once. "I hope you find what you're looking for," she said, her tone gentle but edged with truth. As she stepped into the hallway, the receptionist offered a small, encouraging nod. Naomi walked away, the phrase cultural fit echoing in her mind. Not as a barrier, but as a challenge she was ready to overcome. Naomi stepped into the lobby, the glass doors closing behind her with a faint click. Her chest felt tight, but her stride never faltered. The receptionist lifted her head, eyes wide with curiosity, sensing something had shifted. Naomi didn't pause. She moved straight to the sleek kiosk near the elevators. The marble floor reflected her every step, each one more certain than the last. She reached into her bag and pulled out a matte black card, its surface catching the light. The security guard at the entrance, usually indifferent, straightened up, watching her with renewed interest. Naomi pressed the card to the scanner. The screen flickered, then flashed a message in bold letters. "Shareholder access confirmed." The guard's eyebrows shot up. The receptionist's mouth parted in surprise, her earlier pity replaced by something closer to awe. Naomi's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, reading a message from her lawyer. "Acquisition paperwork. Ready." She nodded to herself, her composure unbroken. The guard cleared his throat, offering a respectful nod. "Have a good day, ma'am." Naomi met his gaze, her expression calm, but there was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She walked toward the exit, the weight of the interview already fading. Behind her, the receptionist whispered to a colleague, "Did you see that? She's not just another applicant." Naomi pushed open the door, feeling the cool rush of air on her face. She paused on the steps, looking up at the building's glass facade, her reflection strong and unwavering. For the first time that day, she allowed herself a small, genuine smile. The power dynamic had shifted, quietly but completely. Naomi slipped her phone back into her bag and walked into the city, her next move already set in motion. Naomi stood at the edge of the plaza, city lights flickering on as dusk crept in. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering for a moment before she typed the message. "Buy the remaining 22%. She hit send, watching the words disappear into the ether. A gentle breeze tugged at her sleeve, the gold bracelet hidden beneath, a reminder of the day's quiet battles. Across the street, the Caldwell Innovations building loomed, its mirrored windows reflecting the shifting sky. Naomi's reflection merged with the cityscape, her presence both subtle and undeniable. She glanced up, catching the faint glow of her own image in the glass, no longer just an applicant, but a force moving beneath the surface. Her lawyer replied with a single word. "Understood." Naomi exhaled, her breath steady. Inside the building, Rich remained oblivious, joking with a colleague, his laughter echoing faintly through the lobby. The receptionist, now off duty, lingered near the doors, replaying the moment Naomi's black card unlocked a new reality. Naomi watched as employees filtered out, some weary, some hopeful, none aware of the coming storm. She felt the weight of history on her shoulders, her mother's sacrifices, her own resilience, the countless times she'd been dismissed or underestimated. Tonight, the balance would tip, not with fanfare, but with a quiet, irreversible shift. She tucked her phone away, her posture relaxed but purposeful. The city's hum grew louder, headlights streaking past as the world moved on, unaware of what was about to change. Naomi turned, her steps measured, her resolve unshaken. The revolution she'd set in motion was silent, but its impact would be seismic. As she disappeared into the evening crowd, her message lingered. The future was already rewriting itself, and she was the author. The memory came to Naomi as she waited for her, car city lights blurring in the distance. Years ago, her mother, Aisha, had worked late nights cleaning offices just like Caldwell's. Naomi remembered the hush of empty halls, the faint scent of bleach, and the quiet determination in her mother's eyes. One evening, as young Naomi traced patterns in the condensation on a window, she overheard voices drifting from a conference room. Rich's laughter cut through the quiet, followed by his careless words, "Diversity hires. Too risky. We need people who fit." Aisha, kneeling nearby, stilled her scrubbing for a heartbeat, her hand tightening around the brush. She didn't speak. She just kept working, her back straight, her face set in a mask of practiced calm. Naomi's childhood was filled with these moments, unseen labor, overheard insults, the heavy knowledge that her mother's hard work would never be enough for men like Rich. She remembered the way Aisha would come home, hands raw, smile tired but unbroken. "You keep your head up, Naomi," she'd say, pressing the gold bracelet into her daughter's palm. "They can't take your worth." Now, as Naomi stood outside the glass tower, that memory burned bright. She could still hear the scrape of her mother's bucket, the way Aisha's eyes would flicker with pride and pain. Naomi's own journey had started in those shadowed hallways, shaped by every slight and every act of quiet endurance. Tonight, her mother's legacy was alive in every step she took. The city seemed to pulse with possibility. Naomi glanced down at the bracelet on her wrist, her resolve hardening. The world had changed, but the roots of injustice ran deep. She would not let her mother's sacrifices be forgotten. The revolution she'd begun was for both of them. Late at night, Naomi sat in front of her laptop, the glow from the screen casting shadows across her determined face. She scrolled through encrypted files, each folder a digital graveyard for voices that had been set aside. Her fingers hovered over a document labeled Resolved. She opened it, reading the words, "Promotion denied to assertive." The note was brief, clinical, and final. Another file told of a black intern dismissed after reporting racist jokes in the break room. There were dozens more lives and careers reduced to a few cold sentences, tucked away behind passwords and firewalls. The office was silent, except for the hum of the server in the next room. Naomi's jaw clenched as she read, her pulse quickening, with each new revelation. She saw a Latina engineer's plea for advancement marked, "Not a team player." There were reports of meetings where ideas were dismissed, names misspelled, contributions erased. Every file was a piece of a larger puzzle, a pattern of exclusion carefully hidden by bureaucracy. Naomi printed out several pages, the stack growing thicker with every click. She paused to rub her eyes, exhaustion threatening to overtake her, but she pressed on. These weren't just documents. They were stories, each one echoing her mother's struggles, her own frustrations and the silent battles of so many others. She glanced at the clock, realizing hours had passed. Still, she kept reading, determined to bring these buried stories into the light. The weight of institutional neglect pressed on her shoulders, but she refused to look away. Naomi gathered the stack of papers, her resolve steeled by every injustice she uncovered. As dawn approached, she knew she was holding more than evidence. She was holding the truth the company had tried to erase. Naomi arrived early, the building nearly empty, fluorescent lights flickering overhead. On the security desk, she noticed a folded piece of paper, edges worn, her name written in careful print. She picked it up, unfolding it slowly. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "I can't keep doing this. They told me to watch the black employees more closely. I tried to ignore it, but every day it got harder. I'm resigning. I hope you make things better than I could. Marcus." She stood there, the words settling over her like a heavy blanket. The security badge lay beside the note, its plastic surface scratched and faded. Naomi glanced around, remembering Marcus's quiet nods, his habit of holding the elevator when she was running late, his gentle greetings at the door. He'd always seemed watchful, but never intrusive. Now she understood the burden he'd carried. A cleaning staff member passed by, pausing when she saw Naomi with the letter. She offered a small, sympathetic smile and kept moving, her cart squeaking down the hall. Naomi tucked the letter into her folder, her grip tight. The resignation wasn't loud or dramatic, but it spoke volumes. Marcus had chosen conscience over comfort, stepping away from a job that demanded complicity. Naomi's thoughts raced. How many others had been given the same instructions? How many had stayed silent, afraid of losing what little security they had? She felt anger simmering beneath her calm exterior, but also gratitude for Marcus's honesty, for his quiet resistance. She placed the badge and letter in her bag, determined to honor his choice. The building felt different now, every hallway charged with the knowledge of what had been endured and what could no longer be ignored. Naomi walked toward the elevator, her purpose sharpened by a single act of quiet defiance. Naomi sat in a dim office, the only light coming from the monitor as she queued up the security footage. The timestamp showed late afternoon, the conference room nearly empty except for Rich and two HR managers. The audio was faint but clear enough. Rich leaned back, mimicking a candidate's accent, pulling the edge of his tie over his head to maca hijab. The HR managers exchanged uneasy glances. One coughed, the other looked away, lips pressed together. Rich laughed, shaking his head. "Can you imagine the client's face?" His words hung in the air, ugly and unchallenged. Naomi's fist tightened around a pen, her knuckles whitening. She watched as the candidate, a young woman in a blue headscarf, entered the room moments later, her posture straight, her eyes hopeful. Rich's demeanor changed instantly, his voice turning syrupy. "Thanks for coming in," he said, but his gaze never met hers. The HR managers forced polite smiles, one nervously tapping a folder against her knee. The candidate answered questions, quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her voice steady despite the tension. When the interview ended, the woman gathered her things and left, her shoulders slightly hunched. Rich rolled his eyes as soon as the door closed, muttering something Naomi couldn't quite hear. The HR managers didn't respond. One stared at her phone, the other scribbled in a notebook, both eager to move on. Naomi paused the footage, her breath shallow. The casual cruelty, the complicity, the way bias seeped into every gesture, it was all there, preserved in grainy pixels. She saved the video to a secure drive, her resolve hardening. This wasn't just about one bad interview, it was about a culture that rewarded mockery and punished difference. Naomi shut down the monitor, her reflection in the screen clear and resolute. She would not let this stay hidden. The office was nearly deserted when Naomi returned late that night. The hum of the vending machine and the distant clatter of a mop echoed down the hall. She waited by the stairwell, glancing at her watch, nerves prickling beneath her calm. Footsteps approached, slow, deliberate. The janitor, Mr. Ellis, appeared, his coveralls stained from a long shift. He didn't speak at first, just nodded and reached into his pocket. His hand trembled slightly as he held out a small USB drive, the plastic casing smudged with grease. Naomi accepted it, their fingers brushing for a moment. "It's all there," Mr. Ellis whispered, voice rough from years of night work. "Emails, memos, stuff they thought nobody'd ever see." He glanced over his shoulder, eyes wary. "You didn't get this from me." Naomi nodded, her gratitude unspoken but clear. Mr. Ellis's gaze softened. "I've seen too much, Miss Carter. Too many people hurt for no reason." He shifted his weight, the keys on his belt jangling. "My niece applied here last year. Didn't even get a call back. I knew why." Naomi tucked the USB into her bag, her resolve deepening. "Thank you," she said quietly. Mr. Ellis offered a tired smile, then turned to his cart, pushing it down the hall. The wheels squeaked, fading into the distance. Naomi stood alone for a moment, the weight of what she held pressing on her chest. She slipped into her office, locking the door behind her. The USB sat in her palm, heavier than it looked. She plugged it in, watching files bloom across the screen. Subject lines about team homogeneity, memos coded with exclusion. Naomi's pulse quickened. The truth was finally in her hands, and she would not let it disappear again. Naomi lingered in the break room, the USB drive still warm in her pocket. Mr. Ellis reappeared, glancing around before joining her by the coffee machine. He poured himself a cup, hands shaking just enough to rattle the paper cup. "You know," he murmured, voice barely above a breath, "he's been doing this for 20 years. Naomi met his eyes, searching for any trace of exaggeration but found only exhaustion. She leaned in, lowering her voice. "You mean rich?" Mr. Ellis nodded, staring into his coffee. "Different faces, same story. People come and go, but the rules never change. You're either what they want or you're out before you start." He looked up, the fluorescent lights catching the lines etched deep on his face. "My brother worked here too, left after a year, said he couldn't keep pretending not to see." Naomi's fingers curled around the edge of the counter. "Why, didn't anyone say anything?" she asked, her tone gentle. Mr. Ellis shrugged, a bitter smile flickering. "Bills don't pay themselves. Folks got families. Most just keep their heads down and hope it misses them." He took a sip, wincing at the taste. "But it never does, not for long." A young intern entered, pausing when she saw them. She offered a shy wave, then hurried out, sensing the gravity in the room. Naomi watched her go, feeling the weight of years pressing on her shoulders. Mr. Ellis set his cup down, voice rough. "Don't let them bury it again, Miss Carter. You've got more power than you think." Naomi nodded, her resolve hardening. "I won't." Mr. Ellis gave a small approving nod before heading back to his rounds. Alone, Naomi drew a breath, the truth settling in her chest. She would break the cycle, no matter how long it had lasted. Naomi sat across from her lawyer in a quiet office, the city's glow muted behind thick glass. A stack of documents lay between them, settlement numbers, circled in red. Her lawyer, Ms. Patel, tapped a pen against the folder, voice low. "They're offering a generous payout. You could walk away. No more stress, no more threats." Naomi's gaze didn't waver. "It's not about the money," she said, her tone steady. "It never was." Ms. Patel leaned forward, concern creasing her brow. "You know they'll fight back. They'll drag your name through the mud if they have to." Naomi nodded, fingers tracing the edge of her mother's bracelet. "Let them. I'm not here to cash out. I want the truth out there. I want his legacy, not his check." Wow. Pause settled between them, heavy with possibility. The rain outside tapped against the window, steady and persistent. Ms. Patel sighed, closing the folder. "Most people would take the deal." Naomi offered a faint smile. "Most people haven't lived what I have." She stood, gathering the documents and tucking them into her bag. I want every file, every complaint, every memo. We're not negotiating with silence." Ms. Patel nodded, respect flickering in her eyes. "You're brave, Naomi." Naomi shook her head. "I'm tired. There's a difference." She turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Thank you for standing with me." Ms. Patel replied, "You're not alone in this." As Naomi stepped into the hallway, the weight of her decision pressed in, but her resolve was unbreakable. She glanced at her reflection in the window, the city lights shimmering behind her. This fight was bigger than any settlement. It was about rewriting the story for everyone who'd ever been told to settle for less. Naomi sat at her kitchen table, phone buzzing nonstop, the screen lighting up with alerts. The video she'd sent to the journalist was everywhere now. News feeds, group chats, even her aunt's Facebook timeline. Hashtags scrolled by. Checks Caldwell collapse. Check truth over titles. She scrolled through comments, each one a mix of outrage, disbelief, and vindication. "This is what they do when they think nobody's watching," one post read. Another, "How many more stories like this are buried?" Naomi's heart pounded, but she kept reading. Rich's PR team scrambled, issuing a bland statement. "We are committed to diversity and inclusion. We take these allegations seriously." The words felt hollow, recycled from 1,000 other scandals. Naomi's phone rang, an old colleague, voice shaky. "You did it, Naomi. People are finally listening." She thanked him quietly, her voice almost a whisper, then hung up, staring at the wall. On TV, Rich appeared, jaw clenched, reading from a teleprompter. "We regret any misunderstanding. Caldwell Innovations strives for a welcoming environment." The anchor's eyebrow arched, skepticism clear. Naomi watched, noticing the way Rich's hand trembled as he shuffled his notes. She recognized the fear in his eyes, the panic of someone who'd never expected to be held accountable. Her inbox filled with messages from strangers, some sharing their own stories, others offering support. A former HR manager wrote, "I wish I'd spoken up sooner." Naomi replied, "It's not too late." She felt the tide turning, the old power structures beginning to crack. As night fell, Naomi stepped onto her balcony, city lights flickering, below. She breathed in the cool air, letting the noise fade. The truth was out, and there was no going back. For the first time, she felt the world shifting beneath her feet. A quiet, unstoppable wave. Naomi sat in her office, the glow of her laptop, illuminating her face as messages poured in. Each one carried a story, a wound, a plea for acknowledgement. "He called my hair unprofessional. I was told to change how I spoke. They laughed when I brought up diversity." The words stacked up, line after line, until her inbox overflowed with pain that had been tucked away for years. She read each account carefully, feeling the weight of every sentence. A spreadsheet grew on her screen, names replaced with initials, details blurred for safety. Still, the patterns were unmistakable. Dismissals disguised as performance reviews, promotions withheld for being too outspoken, meetings where voices were drowned out, ideas brushed aside. Naomi's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her chest tight with anger and empathy. A former intern wrote, "I thought it was just me." Another message, "Thank you for showing us we weren't alone." Naomi replied to as many as she could, her responses brief but sincere. "Your story matters. You deserved better. We're changing this together." Each reply was a small act of solidarity, a promise that these stories would not be erased. Outside her office, a group of employees gathered in the hallway, voices low but urgent. Someone taped a handwritten sign to the break room door. "We believe you." Naomi watched through the glass, her heart swelling. The chorus of the wronged was no longer a whisper. It was a force, a collective demand for justice. She printed out the messages, stacking them on her desk until the pile was impossible to ignore. As she turned off her laptop, Naomi knew the company could never return to the way things were. The truth had found its voice, and it would not be silenced again. Rich sat alone in his dimly lit study, swirling a glass of wine, the room thick with tension. His phone chimed, a notification from LinkedIn. He glanced at the screen, expecting another message of support or apology. Instead, his daughter's profile appeared, her name now reading Emily Saunders. She'd dropped Caldwell, taking her mother's maiden name. For a moment Rich stared, the meaning settling in. The family crest on his desk looked smaller, almost out of place. He dialed Emily's number, his hand unsteady. The call rang and rang, then went to voicemail. He hesitated, then spoke, his voice rough. "Emily, it's Dad. I saw the update. Please call me back." He hung up, the silence in the room suddenly oppressive. Across the hall, a clock ticked, each second stretching out the distance between them. He opened their last text thread. The messages were brief, mostly logistics and birthdays. He scrolled up, searching for warmth, finding only the cool formality that had crept in over the years. On his bookshelf, a framed photo of Emily as a child smiled back at him, her arms wrapped around his neck. He turned the frame face down, unable to meet her gaze. Meanwhile, Naomi received a message from Emily. "Thank you for standing up. I'm sorry it took me so long to see the truth," Naomi replied. "You're not alone. We all have to choose when to speak." Emily's decision rippled outward, a quiet but public break from her father's legacy. Rich set his glass down, the wine untouched. The weight of his choices pressed in from all sides. The Caldwell name, once a source of pride, now felt like a burden. For the first time, he understood what it meant to lose not just a company, but a future. Rich arrived at the golf club just after sunrise, his bag slung over his shoulder. The parking lot was emptier than usual, dew still clinging to the grass. He checked his phone, expecting the usual string of texts confirming tee times. Instead, there were only brief messages. "Can't make it today. Something came up. Let's reschedule." Each one was polite but final. He scrolled through the list, realizing none of his regular partners would be joining him. He walked into the clubhouse, nodding at the attendant behind the counter. The attendant's smile was strained, eyes darting away. At the coffee bar, two men he'd known for years lowered their voices as he approached, then quickly gathered their things and left. Rich poured himself a cup, the sound of the coffee filling the empty space. He carried it to a table by the window, watching the ground crew work in silence. A group of younger members entered, laughing and joking, but their conversation faded when they noticed him. One offered a stiff nod, the rest averted their eyes. Rich sat alone, stirring his coffee, the clink of the spoon echoing in the quiet room. He tried calling an old friend, but it went straight to voicemail. He left no message. On the course, he played a solitary round, each swing punctuated by the absence of camaraderie. The fairways stretched out, empty and indifferent. At the 18th hole, he paused, looking back at the clubhouse. The laughter and easy chatter that once welcomed him were gone, replaced by a cold, unspoken distance. As he packed up his clubs, Rich felt the full weight of his isolation. The power he once wielded had evaporated, leaving only empty tee times and unanswered calls. The world he'd built had quietly closed its doors. Morning sunlight filtered through the office windows as employees gathered in small groups near the break room and copy machine. Their voices were low, but the energy was unmistakable, a mix of anticipation and relief. Naomi walked past, her presence drawing brief glances and quick, respectful nods. She caught fragments of conversation. "Did you see the video?" "I never thought anyone would speak up." "Maybe things will finally change." The old hush of fear had been replaced by a cautious hope. At the end of the hall, a junior analyst named Priya hesitated before approaching Naomi. "Thank you," she said softly, her hands twisting a pen. "For all of us," Naomi offered, a gentle smile, her own nerves easing. Further down, two longtime employees exchanged a look of quiet understanding, one squeezing the other's shoulder. Even the maintenance supervisor, usually invisible in the morning rush, paused to offer Naomi a thumbs up before returning to his rounds. In the conference room, a manager who once enforced the old rules now sat quietly, reviewing a stack of resumes from candidates who might once have been dismissed. The HR director, eyes tired but determined, pinned a new poster to the bulletin board. "We listen, we change, we act." The words felt heavier than any memo that had come before. As Naomi reached her office, she glanced back at the bustling hallway. The walls, once oppressive, now seemed to breathe with possibility. The rhythm of the workplace had shifted. Conversations that used to die out when certain people entered now continued, voices growing steadier with each passing hour. Naomi closed her door, the sound gentle but final. For the first time, the company felt alive with more than just ambition. It pulsed with the promise of something better, a future shaped by truth, courage, and the collective will to begin again. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Naomi stepped out onto the executive floor, her steps measured and sure. Behind her, a small group of former employees followed, each one carrying a folder, a memory, a scar. The receptionist at the end of the hall straightened, eyes wide, recognizing faces she'd only seen in passing. Naomi's gold bracelet caught the light as she pushed open the boardroom door. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. Rich sat at the far end of the polished table, his expression faltering as he spotted the group entering. A few board members exchanged uneasy glances, one clearing his throat, another shifting in her seat. Naomi paused, letting the moment settle. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioner and the shuffle of papers as a whistleblower placed a file on the table. Naomi moved to the head of the table, her presence commanding but calm. She nodded at her allies, who took seats along the wall, their posture straight, eyes unwavering. A former HR associate, once silent, now resolute, opened her folder, sliding a document toward the directors. The legal counsel's pen hovered over his notepad, uncertain whether to write or wait. Rich tried to regain composure, forcing a tight smile. "This isn't the usual agenda," he said, voice thin. Naomi met his gaze, unblinking. "No, it isn't," she replied, her tone even. The boardroom, once his domain, now felt unfamiliar, charged with the presence of those he'd underestimated. A shareholder glanced at the door, as if considering escape, but stayed seated. Naomi's allies remained silent, their support a quiet force at her back. The balance of power had shifted, not with noise, but with the undeniable weight of truth. The reckoning had begun. Naomi stood at the head of the boardroom table, her fingers resting lightly on the polished wood. The room was silent, every eye fixed on her. She drew a breath, then let her gold bracelet slip down her wrist, the faint click echoing through the space. The sound was crisp, unexpected, and it drew a few startled glances from the directors. Rich shifted in his seat, his confidence wavering for the first time. She spoke, her voice steady but edged with emotion. "You funded a man who believed excellence had a color." The words hung in the air, heavier than any accusation. A board member cleared his throat but said nothing. Naomi's gaze swept the room, pausing on each face. For years, complaints were filed, stories were told, and you looked away. Today, you can't. Rich tried to interrupt, but Naomi raised her hand, the bracelet glinting in the overhead lights. "I'm not here for apologies," she said. "I'm here for accountability." The legal counsel scribbled notes, his hand trembling slightly. A former HR associate nodded, her eyes shining with vindication. Naomi slid a folder across the EC table. "These are the stories you buried, the people you overlooked." The directors exchanged uneasy looks, the weight of complicity settling over them. Rich's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, his usual bravado gone. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional rustle of paper as the board reviewed the evidence. Naomi's bracelet clicked again as she folded her hands, the noise sharp and final. It was a signal. The era of dismissal was over. As she finished, the room remained hushed, the power dynamic irreversibly altered. Naomi's quiet strength filled the space. And for the first time, the boardroom felt like a place where truth could finally be heard. Rich's hand hovered above the table, his fingers twitching as he reached for his watch. The gold band, once a symbol of authority, now felt loose against his wrist. He tried to adjust it, but the clasp slipped, the watch spinning awkwardly before settling on the table with a dull thud. The directors watched, some with thinly veiled discomfort, others with quiet relief. Naomi didn't flinch, her attention fixed on the stack of evidence in front of her. Rich cleared his throat, voice strained. "This is all being blown out of proportion." His words fell flat, met with a heavy pause. The legal counsel looked up, pen poised but unmoving. Naomi's ally, the former HR associate, slid another document across the table. A resignation letter from a valued employee, citing a hostile environment. Rich's jaw clenched, his face reddening as he skimmed the page. A board member leaned back, arms folded, eyes narrowed. "We trusted you to lead with integrity," she said quietly. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. Rich fumbled for his watch, trying to fasten it, but his hands shook. The watch slipped again, landing at the edge of the table. He left it there, defeated. Naomi spoke, her tone calm but unyielding. "Leadership isn't about image. It's about responsibility." Rich avoided her gaze, staring at the gleaming surface of the table. The directors exchanged glances, the old order dissolving in the face of undeniable truth. The meeting stretched on, each new revelation chipping away at Rich's composure. His watch, once a badge of power, now sat forgotten, a silent testament to his unraveling. Naomi's presence filled the void, steady and unwavering. The boardroom, once his stronghold, now belonged to those who had been silenced for far too long. A shareholder at the far end of the boardroom discreetly propped up her phone, camera angled just right. With a tap, the meeting was broadcast to the world. Naomi's voice carried through the speakers, clear and unwavering. "This is not just about one man. It's about a culture that allowed harm to flourish." The live stream counter ticked upward, hundreds, then thousands, joining in real time. Rich noticed the phone, his face paling. He tried to regain control, forcing a brittle laugh. "Let's not turn this into a spectacle." The comment section exploded. "We're watching! Finally, accountability!" Naomi glanced at the screen, then back to the board. "Transparency is not a spectacle, it's overdue." A director shifted, uncomfortable under the digital spotlight. Another leaned forward, reading comments aloud. "She's telling our story. This happened to me, too." The boardroom, once insulated, now felt porous, every word echoing beyond its walls. Naomi's allies sat straighter, emboldened by the support pouring in from outside. Rich's hand hovered over his discarded watch, but he didn't pick it up. His voice faltered as he tried to explain, but the live stream caught every stammer, every evasive glance. Naomi's ally, the former HR associate, spoke up for the first time. "We owe them more than silence." Her words drew a wave of digital applause. As the viewership soared past 1 million, the energy in the room shifted. Naomi's calm presence became a rallying point, her resolve mirrored in the faces of those who had once felt powerless. The world was watching, and there was no turning back. The meeting continued, but the balance had changed. The truth was out, and it was louder than any denial. Naomi's leadership was no longer confined to the boardroom. It belonged to everyone who had ever waited for justice. The boardroom grew still as Naomi's words faded, the only sound the faint buzz of the live stream. Shareholders shifted in their seats, eyes darting from the evidence on the table to the camera's unblinking lens. One director, usually quick to speak, stared at her folded hands, knuckles white against the polished wood. Another removed her Caldwell Innovations lapel pin, placing it quietly beside her notepad. The soft clink echoed in the hush, drawing a few startled glances. Rich looked around, searching for support. He found none. The legal counsel avoided his gaze, busying himself with a stack of untouched documents. Naomi's ally, the former HR associate, met her eyes and offered a small, resolute nod. The weight of years of complicity pressed down on the room, heavier than any accusation. A shareholder cleared his throat, voice barely above a whisper. "We should have listened sooner." The admission hung in the air, raw and unvarnished. Naomi didn't gloat. She simply nodded, acknowledging the shift. The live-stream chat filled with messages. It's time. No more excuses. The boardroom, once a fortress, now felt exposed, every secret illuminated by the gaze of thousands. Rich tried to rally, but his words sounded hollow. "We've always tried to do the right thing." The directors exchanged uneasy looks. The old alliances dissolving. Naomi's presence anchored the room, her calm a stark contrast to the nervous energy swirling around her. As the meeting moved forward, the silence of the shareholders spoke louder than any apology. The era of looking away was over. The boardroom, stripped of its old certainties, braced for change. Naomi's quiet strength filled the void, and the company's future hung in the balance, waiting for someone to claim responsibility. Naomi stood at the head of the table, remote in hand, her expression steady. With a click, the screen behind her flickered, the old Caldwell Innovations logo dissolving into bold gold letters. Carter Collective. The new emblem shimmered, modern and inclusive, reflecting the faces in the room and those watching online. A hush swept over the boardroom. Shareholders leaned forward, some in awe, others in quiet disbelief. Rich's face drained of color as he stared at the screen, his name vanishing in real time. A director snapped a photo, sending it to the company group chat. Within seconds, the image trended on social media, captioned, "A new era begins." Naomi's ally, the former HR associate, smiled for the first time, relief and pride mingling in her eyes. Naomi addressed the room, her voice unwavering. "This company will stand for equity, transparency, and real opportunity. The Carter Collective is more than a name, it's a promise." The words rippled through the live stream, sparking a flood of supportive comments. "Finally, this is history. My daughter will see this." A shareholder, usually reserved, tapped the table gently. "It's about time." The legal counsel nodded, closing his folder as if sealing the past. The energy in the room shifted from anxiety to anticipation. Even those who'd hesitated sensed the inevitability of change. Rich tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The directors didn't look his way. Naomi's focus remained on the future, her gaze sweeping the room, inviting everyone to join her. The Carter Collective logo glowed on the screen, a beacon for all who had waited for justice. As the meeting ended, applause broke out, hesitant at first, then building. The old name faded from memory, replaced by a vision of what could be. Naomi's revolution had a name, and it was here to stay. Rich lingered at the edge of the boardroom as the meeting dissolved into clusters of quiet conversation. He glanced at his phone, expecting messages of support. Instead, his group chat was filled with polite excuses. "Can't make it this weekend?" "Family thing came up. Let's catch up soon." The words felt thin, each one a gentle retreat. He scrolled further, seeing his golf partners quietly remove him from the tea time calendar. The realization settled in. He was being distanced, not just by the company, but by those he'd once called friends. A director he'd known for years avoided his gaze, gathering her things in silence. The legal counsel offered a curt nod, then slipped out without a word. Even the attendant who usually brought him coffee walked past, heading straight to Naomi with a congratulatory handshake. The room, once his domain, now felt unfamiliar. Every relationship suddenly transactional. Rich tried to start a conversation with a junior board member, but the young man mumbled something about a call and hurried away. The laughter and camaraderie, that had once defined these gatherings were gone, replaced by a polite, uncomfortable distance. Naomi's allies stood together, sharing quiet smiles and firm handshakes, their unity unmistakable. He checked his phone one last time, hoping for a lifeline. There was nothing. The boardroom emptied, the echo of footsteps and muted voices fading. Rich gathered his things, moving slower than usual, the weight of isolation pressing down on his shoulders. As he stepped into the hallway, the glass doors closed behind him with a soft click. The world he'd built had shifted, leaving him on the outside. His exit was quiet, unnoticed by most, but for Rich, it was the loudest moment of all, a final, silent goodbye from those who had already moved on. As the new Carter Collective logo flashed across screens, the world outside the boardroom erupted. Naomi's announcement looped on news broadcasts, her calm voice replayed in living rooms and break rooms across the city. Hashtags trended. Carter Collective, hard justice delivered, in new beginnings. Social media feeds filled with clips of her speech, each share a ripple of hope and vindication. In a neighborhood cafe, strangers watched the live stream together. A young black woman wiped away tears, whispering, "She did it for all of us." A barista paused mid-shift, phone in hand, showing coworkers the trending video. "Look, she's everywhere." The energy was contagious. Messages of support poured in from former employees, community leaders, and people who had never met Naomi but saw themselves in her story. Rich's image, caught in a single frame of stunned disbelief, became a meme overnight. Comments ranged from biting to cathartic. "That's what accountability looks like." Tables turned finally. The contrast between Naomi's steady presence and Rich's unraveling was shared, dissected, and celebrated. Back at Carter Collective, Naomi's team gathered in the break room, watching the numbers climb. The former HR associate hugged a colleague, her relief unguarded. "We're part of something real now." Naomi watched quietly, her phone buzzing with messages from people she'd inspired. She replied to as many as she could, her words brief but heartfelt. "Thank you. This is just the beginning." As dusk settled, murals began to appear on city walls. Naomi's likeness, the Carter Collective logo, and the words, "We belong." The movement had outgrown the boardroom, becoming a symbol of healing and possibility. Naomi stood at her window, watching the city glow, knowing the victory was not just hers, but belonged to everyone who had ever waited for justice. Rich returned to his office, the celebration outside a distant hum. He closed the door behind him and glanced at his desk, now cluttered with unopened mail and a half-empty coffee cup. At the far corner sat a framed photo, Rich shaking hands with city leaders, his smile wide, their faces eager. He reached for it, but his hand hesitated. The frame wobbled, tilting forward until it rested at an awkward angle, the glass catching the overhead light and fracturing his reflection. He sat heavily in his chair, the room suddenly colder. The photo, once a symbol of his influence, now looked out of place. He tried to straighten it, but the frame slipped, the glass cracking in the corner. Rich stared at the fracture, the split line running through his own image. He left it askew, unable to fix what had already been broken. Across the room, his assistant quietly packed her things, slipping a Carter Collective offer letter into her bag. She paused at the door, offering a brief sympathetic glance before leaving without a word. The silence was absolute. Rich looked around, realizing how empty the office felt without the steady stream of visitors, the constant calls, the sense of control. He opened a drawer, rifling through old business cards and awards, each one now a relic of a world that no longer existed. The weight of loss pressed in from every side. He picked up the photo again, but the crack had deepened, the image forever changed. Outside, the city moved on, the Carter Collective logo glowing from the building across the street. Rich set the photo down, the frame tilting even further. His legacy, once so carefully constructed, now undone by the truth he'd tried to avoid. The office, once his kingdom, had become a monument to what was lost. The boardroom had emptied, leaving only Naomi and the soft glow of city lights filtering through the windows. She sat at the head of the long table, her mother's bracelet resting against the wood, fingers tracing the delicate engraving. The hum of voices and applause had faded, replaced by a deep, steady quiet. Naomi let out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in weeks. She scrolled through her phone, reading messages from supporters, colleagues, and strangers. Each note was a reminder of what had changed and what still needed to be done. Thank you for giving us hope. My daughter watched your speech with me. We finally feel seen. Naomi smiled softly, her eyes shining with gratitude and exhaustion. Her lawyer, Ms. Patel, knocked gently on the door before entering. "It's done," she said, her voice warm. "The severance package is being donated to HBCUs, just like you asked." Naomi nodded, her resolve unwavering even in the aftermath. "This isn't just about me," she replied. "It's about everyone who was told to wait their turn." Ms. Patel placed a hand on Naomi's shoulder. "You did what many thought was impossible." Naomi looked out at the city, the Carter Collective logo now shining from the building across the street. "We did it together," she said quietly. As Ms. Patel left, Naomi remained seated, letting the moment settle. The storm had passed, but its impact lingered in the air. She closed her eyes, remembering her mother's words. "Keep your head up." The future felt uncertain but full of promise. Naomi stood, gathering her things. She paused at the door, taking one last look at the empty boardroom, a space transformed by truth and courage. With a final, steady breath, she stepped into the hallway, ready for whatever would come next. Rich sat at his kitchen table, the morning sun barely warming the cold surface. His laptop was open, a fresh résumé staring back at him from the screen. He filled out application after application, tailoring each cover letter, listing his decades of experience, his former title, his awards. He hesitated before typing, "Caldwell, Innovations," wondering if he should leave it off. He didn't. He clicked Submit and waited, watching the spinning circle. His phone buzzed with an automated reply. "Thank you for your interest. We will review your application." He refreshed his inbox, hoping for a follow-up. Hours passed. Nothing. He checked his phone for missed calls. There were none. Later that afternoon, a recruiter at a promising startup opened his file. She recognized his name instantly, her brow furrowing as she typed it into a search engine. Headlines filled the screen. CEO ousted amid scandal. Carter Collective replaces Caldwell. She closed the tab, sighing, and moved on to the next applicant. Back at his table, Rich tried to call an old colleague for a referral. The call rang twice, then went to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. He scrolled through social media, seeing posts about Carter Collective's rise, Naomi's face everywhere. His own name was conspicuously absent, replaced by stories of change and hope. He sent out more résumés. Each one met with the same silence. The world he once commanded had grown smaller, doors closing quietly and completely. The power of his title, his network, his reputation, it all meant nothing now. He stared at the screen, the cursor blinking, waiting for an opportunity that would never come. Rich closed his laptop, the weight of rejection settling in. For the first time, he understood what it felt like to be passed over, to have the world move on without him. Naomi stood in the freshly painted office, sunlight streaming through the windows. The chairs were arranged differently now. No longer a barrier between interviewer and candidate, but a shared space. She glanced at the door. As it opened and the young engineer in a blue headscarf entered, shoulders tense but eyes determined. Naomi rose to greet her, offering a handshake instead of a distant nod. "Thank you for coming back," Naomi said, her voice warm. The candidate hesitated before sitting, glancing around the room as if searching for the ghosts of her last interview. Naomi noticed and smiled gently. "This company is different now. You deserve to be here." The interview began, but it was less an interrogation and more a conversation. Naomi asked about her ideas, her dreams, what she hoped to build. The engineer's voice grew stronger with each answer, her confidence returning. Naomi listened, truly listened, jotting notes and nodding encouragement. The receptionist, passing by, peeked in and offered a thumbs-up, a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes. When the interview ended, Naomi stood and extended her hand again. "We'd be honored to have you join us," she said. The candidate's eyes widened, then filled with relief and pride. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling just a little. As she left, the sunlight caught the gold of Naomi's bracelet, a quiet reminder of the journey that led here. The old interview room, once a place of exclusion and quiet humiliation, now felt open and full of possibility. Naomi sat for a moment, letting the transformation sink in. Change, she realized, didn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it was as simple as a handshake, a seat at the table, and the promise that everyone's story mattered. The company's new chapter had truly begun. Rich stepped into the bustling cafe, the morning rush swirling around him. He waited in line, eyes fixed on his phone, trying to ignore the whispers and sidelong glances from patrons who recognized his face. When he reached the counter, the barista, a transgender black woman with a steady gaze, offered a polite, professional greeting. "What can I get started for you?" she asked, her tone even. He ordered his usual latte, voice tight. She nodded, writing his name on the cup with practiced precision. As she worked the espresso machine, Rich glanced around, noticing a group of college students at a nearby table watching the Carter Collective announcement on their phones. Their laughter stung, though he couldn't hear the words. The barista set his cup on the counter, her expression unreadable. "Order for Richard," she called. He reached for it, pausing as he saw the words written in bold marker. "Not a cultural fit." The phrase hit him harder than any headline. He looked up, searching her face for a hint of mockery, but she only met his eyes, calm and unwavering. He stood there, cup in hand, feeling the weight of the moment. The barista turned to the next customer, her focus already elsewhere. Rich's cheeks flushed as he realized the tables had turned. The exclusion he once wielded so easily now circled back to him, silent but unmistakable. He took his coffee and left, the door swinging shut behind him. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to his discomfort. For the first time, Rich understood what it meant to be quietly, publicly dismissed, not with cruelty, but with the simple truth written for all to see. Rich sat alone in his living room, phone in hand, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. He scrolled through his contacts, pausing over familiar names, former colleagues, business partners, friends he'd once shared dinners and victories with. He tapped a number, listening as the call rang and rang, finally clicking over to voicemail. He tried another, then another. Each attempt met with the same result, a recorded message, a promise to call back that never came. He left a few short voicemails, his words awkward and uncertain. "Hey, it's Rich. Just checking in. Hope you're well." He waited, staring at the phone, hoping for a reply. The silence stretched on, broken only by the distant sounds of traffic outside his window. He sent a few texts, simple greetings, questions about golf or lunch, but none were answered. On his social media feed, he watched as old friends and colleagues celebrated the Carter Collective's rise, their posts filled with hope and excitement. His name was absent, replaced by stories of progress and change. He tried to join a group chat, only to find he'd been removed. The realization settled in, cold and final. The world he'd built connections in had quietly moved on. He set the phone down, the weight of isolation pressing in. The laughter and camaraderie he'd once taken for granted were gone, replaced by an emptiness he couldn't ignore. Each unanswered call, each unreturned message, was a reminder of how quickly influence could vanish. Rich leaned back, closing his eyes. For the first time, he understood that power wasn't just about titles or money, it was about trust, and that trust, once broken, was almost impossible to reclaim. Naomi walked through the doors of the newly renovated tech incubator, the familiar scent of fresh paint and brewed coffee mingling in the air. The space buzzed with the energy of young entrepreneurs, their voices weaving together in a tapestry of ambition and hope. She paused near the entrance, her eyes drawn to a gleaming brass plaque mounted on the wall. She stepped closer, reading the inscription, Aisha Carter, where resilience meets revolution. Naomi traced the engraved letters with her fingertip, her heart swelling with pride and longing. This building, once her mother's modest diner, had been transformed into a hub for innovation and opportunity. The old checkered floors were gone, replaced by sleek workstations and sunlit meeting rooms. But the spirit of Aisha Carter lingered in every corner. A group of students passed by, one pausing to read the plaque aloud. "That's her mom," another whispered, nodding toward Naomi. She smiled, acknowledging the recognition, her mother's legacy now a beacon for the next generation. An older woman, a former diner regular, approached with a gentle smile. "Your mother would be proud," she said softly, pressing Naomi's hand in hers. Naomi looked around, seeing not just the transformation of a building, but the continuation of a dream. Her mother had served meals and encouragement here, believing in the promise of every customer who walked through the door. Now, that same belief fueled a new wave of creators, inventors, and leaders. She blinked back tears, feeling the weight and wonder of legacy. The plaque was more than a tribute, it was a promise. That resilience could spark revolution, and that every sacrifice her mother had made would ripple forward, changing lives she'd never meet. Naomi stood a little taller, ready to honor that promise every day. Naomi settled at a long wooden table in the heart of the tech incubator's cafe, the hum of conversation and laughter swirling around her. The space was alive with possibility, young founders brainstorming over laptops, mentors sharing advice, and neighbors from the old diner days stopping in for a cup. The air felt lighter, charged with the energy of new beginnings and honest connection. Group of interns squeezed in beside Naomi, their excitement contagious. One, a first-generation college student, nervously pitched an idea for an app that would help local businesses grow. Naomi listened intently, nodding encouragement, her presence both grounding and inspiring. Across the table, a retired teacher offered feedback, her years of experience woven gently into every suggestion. The barista, once a regular at Aisha's diner, delivered coffee with a warm grin. "Feels different, doesn't it?" he said quietly. Naomi smiled, watching as people from all backgrounds shared stories and dreams, the old barriers replaced by genuine curiosity and respect. A mural of Aisha Carter overlooked the scene, her painted eyes kind and wise. Naomi caught herself glancing up, comforted by the silent reminder of her mother's faith in community. The cafe was no longer just a place to eat or work. It was a space where everyone belonged, where every voice mattered. As sunlight streamed through the windows, Naomi realized this was the true reward. Not just success, but the creation of a place where justice and opportunity flowed as freely as coffee. Every shared table, every exchanged idea, was a quiet act of healing, proof that change, once started, could spread from one person to the next, rewriting the future in small, hopeful steps. Naomi stood by the tall windows of the tech incubator, her gaze drifting over the city's shifting skyline. Morning sunlight poured in, illuminating her reflection in the glass. She saw not just her own face, but the echoes of her mother's strength and the hope of the community now thriving within these walls. Behind her, the cafe bustled with laughter and collaboration, the energy of possibility pulsing through every corner. She watched as a group of young entrepreneurs gathered outside, their animated conversation a testament to the new culture she'd helped build. One of them glanced up, catching Naomi's reflection and offering a wave. She smiled, feeling the connection ripple outward. The old days of exclusion and quiet humiliation seemed distant now, replaced by a spirit of welcome and shared ambition. Naomi's thoughts wandered to her mother's sacrifices, the long nights, the quiet encouragement, the unwavering belief that dignity and justice could change the world. She pressed her palm to the glass, grounding herself in the present moment. The city moved around her, unaware of the battles fought in silence. The victories won with restraint. A mentor paused beside her, offering a cup of tea and a nod of respect. "You've changed things," he said simply. Naomi accepted the gesture, her gratitude unspoken but deeply felt. The reflection in the window was no longer just hers, it belonged to everyone who had dared to hope for something better. As she turned away, Naomi carried the weight and wonder of legacy with her. The face in the glass was both a reminder and a promise that real change starts quietly, grows in community, and endures through every act of courage. The future, she realized, was already taking shape. As dusk settled over the city, Naomi stood on the rooftop of the tech incubator, the skyline glowing with possibility. Below, the cafe lights flickered on, laughter and conversation drifting. Up through open windows, she watched the world she'd helped shape come alive, faces new and familiar, all sharing in the promise of something better. The Carter Collective logo shone across the street, a beacon in the fading light. Her phone buzzed with messages of gratitude and hope. "You gave us a voice. My daughter wants to be like you." Naomi listened to the city's pulse, her heart full. She pressed record, her voice steady and sure. "They tried to erase us, so we rewrote the story." Her words carried over scenes of transformation, young founders pitching ideas, the mural of Aisha Carter glowing in the evening sun, Rich sitting alone at a distant cafe, his world smaller and quieter than ever before. Inside, the shared tables were full, every seat a testament to the power of inclusion. Naomi's reflection in the glass merged with those around her, a living symbol of change. The old wounds had not vanished, but healing had begun in every handshake, every new hire, every act of courage that quietly defied the past. As the last light faded, Naomi turned from the window, her mother's bracelet cool against her wrist. The city lights blinked on, illuminating a future built on dignity, justice, and the quiet strength of those who refused to be silenced. The revolution was not loud, but it was unstoppable. Naomi walked back inside, her steps sure and unhurried. The story was hers now and everyone's. The world, finally, was listening.